Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I am your host, Alan Moore, and I just want to thank you so much for joining me today. I am really excited because today's show features Eric Roberge, who is the founder of Beyond Your Hammock, a financial planning firm based in Boston, Massachusetts. He is also a founding member of XYPN, one of our original 30, and a really good friend of mine. So Eric and I were recently chatting about how he markets his firm and how he's growing his practice. So I asked him to come onto the show to talk about how he's building a virtually based financial planning firm, but focusing the majority of his marketing efforts on local marketing. Now, I know we talk a lot about running and building a virtual business, but I honestly believe the best way to grow your firm is by working virtually, but marketing locally. So I'm thrilled to have Eric on the show to talk about how, he is doing just that and what's working for him. Remember that you can join our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP. It's a really great way to come on. You can ask Eric questions. You can ask me questions. And a lot of times the questions that are in the VIP community are what ultimately lead to many of these show ideas. And also, you can download our ebook called The Virtual Advisor at xyplanningnetwork.com/The Virtual Advisor. It's OR for advisor. So The Virtual Advisor, or check out the show notes at xyplanningnetwork.com/29. But in this book, we talk about how to build and grow a virtual planning firm. And that includes technology, marketing, compliance, and more. So definitely check that out. And remember, you can find the show notes along with resources mentioned in this episode at xyplanningnetwork.com/29. This month's shows were brought to you by Financial Planners Assistance, providing compliance services to financial planners and other investment advisors since 1982. Financial Planners Assistance is a boutique consulting firm that provides the personalized compliance services firms are looking for. Check them out at financialplannersassistance.com and also check out our interview with their president and senior compliance consultant, Jim Cullen. So without further ado, here's the interview with Eric Roberge. Hey, Eric, welcome back to the show, man.
Thanks for having me, Alan. This is going to be exciting to do yet another podcast with XYPN. Can't wait.
You are our first return guest, other than Kitsis, of course, since he co-hosts quite a few of them, but our actual first interviewee that is going to be back on the show. And I'm excited. So for anybody that did not catch Eric's first interview, you can go back to episode 6, xyplanningnetwork.com/6, and you can hear an interview about Eric's career and basically how he got from kind of point A to point Z at this point, which is, getting started in the industry all the way to owning his own practice called Beyond Your Hammock based in Boston. So today we wanted to kind of circle back on some things and questions that I get quite often. I think, Eric, you get quite often. Some of them came off the podcast that we did earlier in the year, and then some of them are just kind of general questions about what it means to really run a virtual practice and grow a virtual practice and grow your RIA. And I think that people kind of put us in two camps. They say we're either, we do everything in person, right? And we meet, and this is the traditional way. We put on our suit and tie and we sit across from the mahogany conference room table in our office with clients, and everything we do is in person and we don't even know what the internet looks like. Or everything we do is virtual, and we do all of our marketing virtually. We do all of our client meetings virtually. Everything is done that way, and we work from home in our pajamas. And the truth is, some of the most effective, probably the most effective way to build a practice is actually to bridge that gap and not actually end up on one extreme or the other. Would you agree with that?
I'd agree 100% with that. One of the things that I live by is everything in moderation, and I think it's no different here. I grew up in this industry doing the face-to-face stuff and meeting with clients face-to-face. I then chose to start working from a virtual perspective. And that doesn't mean that I give up on all of the networking and all of the relationships that I built from a face-to-face standpoint. It just means that I now am able to blend the two together and create a bigger marketing effect overall.
Yeah, and I think that part of it is probably our fault on this podcast and other, just kind of promoting some of the XYPN members or advisors that are out there that are just really, honestly, 100% virtual. They do nothing in person. Truth be told, that's a very small minority. I lived that world for a little while, but truth be told, I was more in the world that we're going to be talking about today with kind of bridging that gap between in-person and virtual. But I think it almost scares people because they think like, oh my gosh, I have to go from everything in person to everything virtual. I'm going to lose all my clients. How am I going to get clients? How do you market, when the world is your oyster and all of a sudden everything's on the internet and nothing's in person? And I think it's almost overwhelming. So I'm excited to talk through today just kind of how you can market your practice in order to, how can you use, I guess, in-person marketing to grow a virtual practice? Because, and maybe it starts with a discussion on why be virtual? I mean, and for you, what ultimately led you to kind of push into this virtual space instead of continuing to do everything in person?
Well, you touched on a few things there. So just so everybody knows, when we say virtual planning, that can be marketing and it can mean working with clients.
Good point.
So when we blend the two together, that means I can market face-to-face and in person, and I can market online, and I can work with clients face-to-face, and I can work with clients online. So it's some of everything. And I think from that standpoint, we can enter into this conversation. So why I chose to work virtually initially was because I wanted to reduce my overhead. If I was going to launch a company, I didn't have a bunch of savings I could invest in a new company. So working virtually was a way for me to eliminate a ton of overhead and jump into the financial planning, and instead of worrying about trying to get a loan or this or that. And I could really bootstrap my business and grow my practice that way. And from there, it was, oh, wow, this is really convenient. I eliminate a lot of travel, and I don't have to interrupt my client's day by having them travel during rush hour after work to get to an office space. They can just go home, get dinner set, have a good time with their kids, and then have a meeting with me. So all in all, it worked out really well.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point that there's a continuum here, right? And there's a continuum on how are you working with clients. There's a continuum on marketing. And again, everything in moderation. It's really about building what's going to work for you and your client base. And so I was honestly, it almost sounds selfish that, when I started working virtually, it was simply because I really wanted to move away from the city that I had built my practice in. And when I first started my business, I was doing almost everything in person and realized I really wanted to move. And so I kind of forced working virtually on my clients because it was just the way that I had to do it in order to be able to leave and not do a bunch of travel. But to your point, what I figured out really quickly was that clients loved it. I mean, they really wanted. It was almost like they were hesitant at first for that first meeting. And then after the first meeting, I could never get them back in my office because they were just so excited to not have to drive, to not have to get a babysitter, that they could just be at home, and I had clients that were having young babies and mom could just turn the camera and she could nurse, in the meeting, which she would have never done in a client meeting in person, because then with a camera, I just couldn't see. So there's just things like that came up. There's like, okay, this is really beneficial for the clients, but also for ourselves. And I think we can all come up with a host of reasons for why we would want to work virtually. If nothing else, it's so that flexibility, right? I mean, in that why we all started our own businesses was so that we had the flexibility to travel, to spend time with family, to do things we wanted to do. And if I want to go spend a week in Atlanta with my family, I can because I can continue to work. So I don't know very many people that would argue that, working virtually is bad. There's certainly been some arguments that it's not necessarily as effective as in person, and we can argue about that another time. But the real piece comes down to, okay, if you're going to work virtually with clients, do you have to market all virtually? And you would say no, correct?
I would say more than no. Absolutely not. And there's nothing to say that you have to do one thing or the other. Like I said, I started off in the financial planning world doing the face-to-face networking and client work. So I built a bit of a network initially, and you don't have to have a network necessarily to start the business, but it's nice to have one ongoing. So things like my Business Networking International, my B&I meetings that I have every week, where I am interacting with young, motivated business people in Boston. right? I do that every single Tuesday morning. I'm working on the Financial Planning Association of Massachusetts Board of Directors, and I'm running the Next Gen events in Massachusetts. I'm speaking to college students and helping mentor high school students throughout the year, right? And these are all things that I'm not choosing to do these things in order to get business. And I think that happens a lot of times where people say, I have to do this to get business. Well, when you start to fall into that realm, people can read right through you and know that you're not doing things authentically and doing it for the bigger picture. And I think that's going to hurt you more than it's going to help you. So if you can go out there and find the things that you're really passionate about, that you really care about, that you're good at, and apply those to your business somehow, I think that's where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. It doesn't always have to be about business versus social versus family. It can be a blend of all things.
I like that, because if you're showing up to community, let's say, you want to start volunteering in some community organization or something like that, and you're doing it just to get clients, and it's not, a cause or an event or an organization that you're really passionate about, it's going to show so fast because you're not going to have the energy. Whereas if your passion is community theater or, is theater and you want to get involved in the local community theater, great, go do that because you love it and you're passionate about it. And it is something that happens in person, not necessarily virtually. And who knows where that will lead. Kind of goes back to our conversations in pretty much every episode that we've had of XYPN Radio, which is having a really clearly defined niche market. And what I think people find is that their niche market tends to hang out in similar organizations and similar places as they do. And so, if you're really passionate about, again, community theater, and there are other people really passionate about it, then those conversations may happen organically. And you say, hey, this is actually somebody I'd love to work with. Or they say, they want to work with you. So what are you finding in terms of just effectiveness of growing your practice? I mean, there's so many different things you can do marketing wise. And in our last episode, we had on Kaylee Hawk, the XYPN marketing manager, to talk about kind of how to build, how to get your website up and running and using a blog and things like that. And that's all. And we can talk more about that and how you're leveraging it. But are you finding that most of your clients are coming from online efforts? Are they coming from in-person, stuff that you're involved in, or just a really good blend of the two?
I think it's a blend of the two. I know it's a blend of the two. It's no one thing in particular. And some people might say, I'm not doing my business justice by really defining a very stringent marketing process and repeating it over and over again. I'm not a big fan of repetition, so that may help or hurt me. And in this case, I think it helps because it just gives me the freedom to live my life the way I want to live it, to run my business the way I want to run it, and therefore not feel bound by any one particular process. So for me, I think it's just going out there and living my brand. And when I live my brand, people want to know what I do for a living. Therefore, I don't have to force it down their throat because they're asking questions about what I do. And if people like you, they're going to want to work with you, regardless of whether you have the best financial planning software in the world or not. They're going to work with you because they like you and they trust you. And that's the biggest thing. Face-to-face or online, you have to build that trust.
Yeah, I want to circle back to talking about living your brand, because that's definitely something that you have such a unique brand. I definitely want to dig into that. One of the things you talked about is, you live in Boston, right? And so not exactly an easy city to get around in from a traffic perspective. There are certainly worse cities. I grew up in Atlanta, so I understand that, the whole concept of an hour drive every direction. Do you see that, you need to be meeting with clients virtually simply because you are in a big city, and even local clients are, I guess, just prefer to work with you so they don't have to deal with traffic? Or do you see this as something that can work, I guess, no matter where you're at?
It can work no matter where you're at. Certainly if something is physically easier to do, for example, having a video versus trying to fight Boston traffic, then sure, go ahead. But what I found is that when I started my business, I was almost completely virtual from a client perspective, working with clients. But now what I'm finding is the more I'm getting involved in Boston, the more I have the opportunity to meet people face to face. So for example, I have a new client that just started working with me. And we haven't met yet for our first meeting, but our first meeting is going to be face-to-face. Because I do think that when it's available, having a face-to-face meeting to solidify that initial relationship is important. And if I can do that, then great. I can spend 30 minutes traveling to this person, have that meeting, establish the relationship, and then from then on, maybe periodically check back in face-to-face, but then continue that relationship virtually. Because it just works that much easier if you can grease the wheels like that.
It is a good idea. And some people would, and folks we've had on this show would certainly argue that you don't need that in-person meeting to solidify the relationship. I think that it's different. I do agree with folks that say that, a purely virtual relationship with a client that you've never met is probably a little different than it is with one that you've shaken hands with and had a meeting in person or even just had a beer or coffee with, depending on how, I guess, your relationship with your clients. I think it's different, but it's not necessarily better or worse. But to your point, if you have the opportunity to meet in person, why not? I mean, and even if you have clients across the country, you can still meet with them whenever you're in that city, because most of us travel all over the place at times. And so if you happen to have a client in LA, great, you can meet with them whenever you're in LA for a conference.
Yeah. And what just came up was, this is a people business, right? And people tend to enjoy meeting other people. So if you're building a virtual practice because you don't like people, it's not going to work, right? Bottom line, it's not going to work. So it doesn't really matter if it's in person or virtual. I can argue both sides of the coin because I have clients that I've never met before, and it's a great relationship. So it doesn't really matter. It's just adding different perspective to solidify those relationships, because it is all about the relationship. So whatever you can do to better relationships, it's going to better your business, bottom line.
And you made an interesting point earlier about not doing repetition well. I am terrible at repetition. I really like to mix things up. And so having some different pieces to mix up every day, that some days you're meeting with clients virtually, some days you're going and having coffee, sometimes you're meeting with them in person, sometimes you're out networking in person, sometimes you're marketing online. That's good for my personality because it keeps me engaged and it keeps me interested, as opposed to, like I said, if you're doing the same thing every day and everything is the exact same, I would be bored with that about 2 weeks. Like I just couldn't survive. So sometimes it is about building what's going to work for you and what you enjoy doing, and then therefore what's going to be actually effective for you.
Sure. Yeah, it's kind of like you jump into the jungle and you have your machete and you're just chopping away at things. And then when you come back through the jungle again, you may go down that same route, you may not, but you don't have to. Mm-hmm. So after a while, you start to repeat certain things, and certain things become a normal occurrence. But my weeks are never the same. Aside from one or two set meetings / conference calls that I have, every day is different. And it doesn't matter if it's a Saturday or a Friday or a Monday. Like, I'm just going to do things as they develop. And that's just how I run my business. And guess what? Nothing falls through the cracks. It works for me. And it may not work for you, but, find what does.
I love that. People have often asked, how do you start, building this, national brand if you're going to be working virtually and working from home? And what I want to dig in a little bit on is kind of proving this concept that you can build a virtual business with a local marketing focus. And I think you can do that in a couple of different ways. One is to know that Google search, which is by far the largest, used search engine. There's not a close second. Actually, the second one is YouTube. So they own the top two search engines on the internet. And third place is way on down the line. They still love local search. They still want, whenever someone says financial planner and they're standing in Boston, financial planners in Boston pop up. So if they're going to Google and they're looking for you, but don't know who you are, Google is going to push them towards local folks. They're not going to find me out in Montana or somebody in California right off the bat unless they're, they start digging in on specific content questions like financial planning for Delta flight attendant. They'll get then it may go a little more nationally instead of just local, but Google still loves local search. Have you gotten any clients from local search at all? Like, are you finding that has been in any way effective for you?
Yes, it has. There are two things there. One, I'm doing a terrible job of SEO online right now. Not because if you search my name, you're going to find me all over the place. If you search financial advisors in Boston, I'm probably not going to show up first. So there's some tweaks to be made on that side of the coin. However, I have a great example of how it works to blend the two together. I recently talked to a prospective client, and he initially came across my name on several occasions online reading articles. Right, I was quoted in articles, or I had written the article somewhere in some publication. And then he said, okay, I like what he's saying, and did a Google search. He did a Google search, saw my name pop up in several different areas, one of them being the XY Planning Network website. So he goes to that website, sees all of what XY Planning Network has to offer, and checks out my bio there. And so that's like the second set of touches for this guy. Then he happens to have just started a livery service as a side job because he wanted to make more income. He's kind of an innovative guy and very entrepreneurial, so he's trying to see what happens in this livery service. So he's bringing people from point A to point B in his car. And one of the times he did this, my name came up. The passenger actually brought up my name as a financial advisor who works with younger professionals. So at this point, he's like, oh my God.
No way. That's incredible.
To this guy, because I've heard him all over the place. Like, people are talking about him. Did I go out and specifically try to make this happen? No, but because of all the things I'm involved in, it happens.
That's hilarious.
It was awesome.
Oh my gosh. That's like so... It's amazing just how randomly people can find you. And it does go to show the importance of doing everything you can to get your name out there, getting quoted in the media, writing articles, being findable on the internet, and like I said, in-person networking to be sure people know what you do. Importantly, who you do it for, right? If that guy had said, oh yeah, I know this financial planner, like that's not a very good referral, but for him to be able to say, I know a financial planner that specifically works with clients like you, that's a huge help. And it really goes back to the defining your ideal client profile, because networking and sharing kind of what you do with people is so much easier if they know who you do it for, because it's easier for your name to pop up whenever they're thinking about, whenever they're talking to someone that fits your ideal client profile.
Right. And certainly, just like everybody says, it's really difficult sometimes to narrow down that focus to a particular niche because you don't want to leave anybody else out, especially when you're starting to build your business, right? Anybody that can fog a mirror, you want to bring on. Mm-hmm. Well, we can argue whether that's the smartest way to go or not. But if you really are specific, you have to think it really will benefit you, because you have to think when you're talking to other professionals, say you're networking, you're connecting with centers of influence, other professionals who may be able to refer you their clients or other people because they're not doing what you're doing, they're doing tax work or they're doing estate planning work or whatever it is. If they're talking to a ton of financial advisors and everybody's giving them the same pitch. They can be trusted and they work to help people handle their money, and they're the best investment advisors, whatever it is, right? They're getting the same pitch over and over again. So if you just step up to the plate and say, hey, I'm a financial advisor, I work virtually, I work specifically with entrepreneurial-minded professionals in their 30s. So if you ever hear about somebody that fits that mold, you think of me. That's going to blow their mind, because nobody gets that specific. And even if they don't send you everybody and they just send you that person, that's a win for you. So do that.
Yeah, because there's nothing, in my opinion, there's nothing worse than getting a referral from a client or another professional that's just so outside your niche, but I almost feel obligated to work with them because someone sent them to me, and it's like, oh, well, so-and-so a state attorney, sent me over. And I'm like, I remember this happened once where they were in their late 60s. They had gone through the estate planning process with this attorney. And I was just like, I felt obligated to work with them because this estate attorney had sent them my way. And I didn't want them to go back and go, oh yeah, that Allen guy's a jerk and wouldn't work with us because we're old or anything like that. But that was my fault, because when I started my practice, I didn't have a clearly defined niche. And as it developed over time, I probably didn't do the best job of sharing it with people that I met before I had a niche, because I was the guy that on my website, it said I work with individuals and families. So everybody, that was my first About Me page. But thankfully it worked out. But yet, it is kind of one of those things that it's really nice when the referrals that are coming in are highly targeted, because that estate attorney that you just mentioned, that conversation, they're going to say, oh, you're looking at starting your own business and kind of breaking the corporate bonds and doing your own thing, and you're in your 30s and you're married and have a kid, like all these different complexities. I know a guy that specializes in working with people just like you. So call Eric. And that's a huge benefit whenever you're getting that referral.
Yes.
I remember getting a client one time, and this is a little unrelated, but it's just funny how they come to you. I remember they sat down and we were going through stuff, and they said at the end of the meeting, I always give clients time. I always said, you know what, I'll follow up with you. I never asked for I never had the contract for them to sign in the meeting or anything. And I remember they said, we want to work with you. And I said, okay. And I said, any particular reason? And they just said, you're the only advisor we've talked to that's excited about working with us. It was like, you're excited. And truth be told, I was excited because they were like perfect, ideal clients for me. But I was the only one that they had talked to that seemed to even care about the fact that they became clients or not. And all the other advisors, they said, just seemed bored in the intro meeting. And they were great clients. Most fee-only advisors would have been happy to work with them because their assets were high enough. It wasn't like they didn't have anything. But I was the only one that was just excited. And they were thrilled. And they were actually a fully virtual client. They were out in California when I was in Wisconsin. So you just never know. It's just kind of funny how ultimately where clients come from.
Sure.
Have you found any particular in-person work, whether it be being involved on a volunteer basis or getting involved in FPA, or you mentioned BNI for networking? Have you found any of those to be more effective than the other? I mean, if you could only choose one, is there one that you would focus on?
No. Well, yeah. So let me put it this way. Yes, there are some that are more effective than others, but I would never just choose one because
Sure.
Going back to what I said, I hate doing just one thing all the time.
Right.
BNI for one thing. So this is going to be layered with disclaimers, but BNI for me has been really great. I've been in several different networking groups, all of them BNI. Each of them have their own group personality. Depending on who's in the group, what they do for work, you're going to get a different experience, whatever group you go and visit.
Let's actually take a step back. Tell listeners what BNI is, because they may not have heard of it.
Sure. BNI is an international networking organization that really is driven by the idea of giver's gain. So you give something to other people, and in return, they'll give back to you. So lead with helping others first is the prime message. And to do that, you have individual groups, and typically they're per town. Some towns have more than one. Boston has about 4 or 5 of them. You have these networking meetings every single week, and inside the group, you have an individual from each profession. So there's one financial advisor, there's one CPA, there's one copier salesperson, payroll services person. So any number of industries can be represented, and they're not all the same in every group. However, the idea is that you lock out your competition because there is no competition inside of the group. And you get to know, like, and trust one another in a way that you feel comfortable referring people back and forth. That's the gist of it.
So do you find, because I have looked into BNI before when I was living in cities that actually had BNI, and financial services was always taken. And it was like, I don't know, maybe you can tell us how you actually got into being the financial service person, because I feel like that's a highly coveted position inside of these organizations. But once I guess let's start there. How did you get it? Was it just luck of the draw or anything unique in order to be able to get in there?
Yeah, there's a couple of challenges when it comes to BNI as a financial advisor. One is that every group has a financial advisor, and typically it's someone from Ameriprise or Edward Jones or some regional wirehouse, a regional brokerage or wirehouse or something like that. We won't get into why that may or may not be a great thing, but I had to find a group that was just starting up. When these groups start up in different areas all the time. So if you find a group that is just starting up, or if you're the person that wants to start a group, you can contact the local BNI office and say, hey, I want to start a group. What do I have to do? And they'll help guide you to get that done. So if you're in there early on, chances are you're going to, if you're likable, of course, you're going to be the advisor in the group. So that's how I did it. I found a group that was just starting up in Boston and joined them when we had about 10 people. And we didn't actually become an official group until we were at 25 people. So it was a bit of a ramp-up process, but during that time, I built relationships with the initial members, and it's really been great so far. One of the great things is because everybody in the group is like 30 years old, right? 30 to 40 years old. So we're all young. We're all motivated at the similar stages of our careers. We're all living in or around the city. And it's that similar mindset and place in life that has us be so productive together.
Now, if I remember correctly, you can go to the BNI website and see all of the local groups, but you can also see the ones that people are trying to get started. So you can look and see if one is getting started, and I believe they have some of the positions listed out. So you may find that a financial services position is available. And this is completely random, but I remember an advisor telling me that the way they got in was because financial services was kind of this overarching thing. And like you said, it could include just being an insurance agent, and they were a fee-only planner. So they actually talked the group into splitting the definitions and doing one as insurance and then one as financial planner and not calling it financial advisor or whatever. And so they were able to have two quote-unquote finance people, but one was an actual planner and the other was just doing insurance sales. And so they really weren't competing still. So you can be creative if you find a group that you love. And is that something that you would recommend, advisors that are getting their business started, that are looking for opportunities to get referrals and that sort of thing? Do you recommend, because that's a pretty big time commitment, right? 1 hour a week means a couple hours a week because of travel time and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's definitely a time commitment, and you really have to have it as a legitimate piece to your marketing. You can't say, okay, I'm going to run my business, and on the side, I'm going to do this BNI thing. It's part of your marketing program. And it's more than just an hour a week because you're going to the meetings every morning, every week. So for me, it's Tuesday morning, 7 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. I have that meeting. And then you are required to meet individually with the members of the group outside of the meetings so that you can get to know them on a more personal level. And this is just like you would network with anybody, right? If you're one-to-one, you're going to learn more about somebody than you are in a group. So that's really an important piece. So that adds another layer of time. But it's also building those relationships, which hopefully will be more productive down the road.
And I think it's important, you can get outside your comfort zone a little bit, but ultimately I think we all have our kind of quote unquote gift when it comes to marketing. I am much better at one-on-one conversation than I am in a group. I mean, I've joked on the show before that if you jump me into a room, and this actually happened recently, I got basically invited to speak to 30 advisors, young planners that were looking at starting their own practice. And I literally walked out of there without contact information for a single person. I mean, I got dropped into a room of 30 ideal members and couldn't get a business card from a single one of them. And that's my own I just suck at networking like that. Now, if you had put me if I had scheduled a lunch with all 30 of those people, I bet I would, one, I'd have their contact information for folks to be able to follow up with them, but I bet I would have been able to get a few members out of it because that's just where I'm better. And I think it's okay to say, like, this is where I'm good. You see those people that are like, they're just really good in more group situations. Some are really good in one-on-one situations. I actually didn't know about the one-on-one opportunity within BNI. So maybe it doesn't matter which one you're good at. You'll have opportunities there both ways. But it's really about figuring out what you enjoy, because I've been in part of networking groups and I would never actually show up because, like, right before I would always come up with an excuse for why I didn't want to go because I just didn't want to be there. But I think that's okay, is to say, like, this is what I enjoy. This is what I'm good at. I'm going to do it. And, get off the shoulding yourself. There's no should. You shouldn't do BNI. You can do BNI if you think it's a good fit for your firm and you can find the right group and you think it's going to be beneficial. Just the same way with blogging. You don't have to blog. You blog because you think it's going to be effective marketing.
Right. And there's definitely a fine line between doing something that you don't like to do and doing something that you're uncomfortable doing. Because on the one side, if you don't like to do it, you're probably never going to like to do it. But if you're just uncomfortable with it because you're not good at it yet, it may be worth trying out, because the more you do it, so for example, speaking in front of a group, and you'll know this, right? The more you do that, the more comfortable you are doing that. And for me, when I was in college, I hated it. I bumbled along in front of a classroom because I'd be so scared of what I was saying. I would blank out and not remember what I said. It was really awful. But now I thrive on it. I want to be the guy speaking to the room because I've practiced it. I've committed time to it, and I love doing it now. So it really does. You just have to understand what you like to do and what you're uncomfortable doing, and they're two different things oftentimes.
That's a really good point, because you can practice marketing, and you can practice sales, you can practice speaking, you can practice having conversations, you can practice explaining what you do. I mean, I can remember the first couple of times I tried to explain how my financial planning firm was different than, the financial planner down the street. And it was horrible. I mean, it was such a bad sales pitch. But now, after you give it about 500 times and you practice over and over and over, you start to get really good at it. I remember Carl Richards, the author of The Behavior Gap, was one of our keynote speakers at XYPN 15 this past year in Charlotte. And he said, what are the best stories in your family? They're the ones that you've heard 1,000 times. You bring someone to your house, a friend or a new significant other, and your mom starts to tell them a story, and you could finish every sentence that she's telling, right? Because she has told this story 1,000 times to different people. But the truth is, she's practiced that story 1,000 times, which is why it's such a good story, and even if you're annoyed because you've heard it 1,000 times, you're still on the edge of your seat, waiting for what's coming, because but it's still exciting. And so it's kind of funny when you think about that, but ultimately, practice. And just because you're uncomfortable with it doesn't mean you're necessarily bad at it. You can avoid the things that you just really don't want to do, but you can get better at the things that you want to do. You just may not be good at.
Exactly.
So you have been very involved in FPA of Boston. So am I correct that you actually helped start a Next Gen chapter there in Boston?
Yes. I had actually attended a Next Gen gathering, which is the annual gathering of advisors under the age of 37 inside of the FPA back in 2013. And it was a great networking experience. I met a lot of people, including Mary Beth Storjahan and Sophia Berra, which I became very friendly with after that. And that's been a real help for my business. But I came back to Boston and realized that we had no Next Gen presence. So I said, we have to change that. And I was already an FPA member attending the half-day meetings throughout the year. So I just went up to the president and I said, hey, what do you think about this? And really, I've heard a million different stories about the support levels in different chapters around the country. However, all I can say about Boston is that it's been the best support mechanism for me. Every board member has been all about Next Gen and supporting me and doing everything that I need to do to create a presence in Boston. So it's been a great experience overall.
It's crazy because FPA Massachusetts is one of the biggest chapters, one of the biggest FPA chapters in the country, and yet they had no Next Gen board, which is kind of interesting. But I was actually in Boston just a month ago now as we're recording this. And I remember talking to the president of the chapter, and he was so gung-ho about Next Gen. And you were actually introduced as the face of the next generation in front of, there had to be 150 people there or 100 people, something like that. It was a pretty big chapter meeting. And to be introduced as the face of Next Gen in Boston for all of FPA Mass to see, that's huge. So it's things like that getting involved and being willing to say, hey, you know what? I want to create a Next Gen chapter. It's all in person. It took some effort. You have to pull the Next Gen folks together, and we could talk about a little bit more about that. But ultimately, you're now being called this face of Next Gen in front of all these advisors that potentially, ultimately they don't work with your clients. They don't want your clients, but they have potentially your clients coming to them looking for help. And now they think of you when they're making a referral. So have you gotten any clients from referrals from other advisors in the Boston area?
Yes, that is actually my secret weapon. I have probably received more referrals from advisors than I've received from any other source. And that's been a long time coming. It's not just, I did this and it happened. It's building that, again, building relationships, building trust, knowing that I'm going to be there for the long term, and then being very super laser focused on who I work with. Because now, like you said, and I didn't even recognize that somebody actually called me the face of Next Gen, because it's so commonplace now for me to be recognized like that. That's a big deal.
It is.
So thank you for sharing that, by the way. But it comes around because, so here's the thing again, I'm not doing this to get business. I'm doing this to help the industry that I am so passionate about. I know that I went through a lot of struggles as a young planner before I became a business owner. So I know the career path is just layered with booby traps and just, it's really tough to find your place from the beginning to an established advisor. So I'm here as a next gen director in Massachusetts to help other planners find their career path and understand all the options available to them so that they can get to that place in their career where they're satisfied, just like I am. So I'm in it for the right reasons. Now, because of that, people see my passion, they see my commitment, they like me, and they are starting to question, more like, what's he really doing? He's virtual and he's dealing with younger people. There's a quick story I have. Recently, I network with several NAPFA members in and around the Boston area, FPA members as well. Usually they're crisscrossing members of both. And I've chosen to build relationships with a handful because I like them, they like me, we get along well. And recently I had lunch with a couple in Boston, and they said, "Hey, Eric, we were just interviewing a prospective advisor coming on to our team, and he brought up your name. And he said, he's doing really cool things with the next generation." And they kind of were smirking in the background saying, "Yeah, we know him." So it's that kind of thing. Again, staying in front of people, and they will refer immediately anybody that fits my type of client without question.
Yeah. And I think you make a really good point to continue circling back to why are you doing it? And so in previous episodes, and I think we did this in a mailbag episode with Kitsis and I, where we talked about, marketing opportunity number one is go meet with every single, particularly fee-only financial advisor in your area that you can find to have lunch with. Go talk to every single one of them and tell them what you do. But ultimately, and while that was very effective for me, again, I love the one-on-one marketing, and I got a ton of clients in my first year from some local planners that were very supportive. One, if you're fee only, they're fee only, you have the same ideals. I didn't have minimums, they did. So they were kind of sending those clients over. But ultimately, I think they wanted to help a young planner get their business up and running. And they knew just sending a handful of clients could be the difference between my RIA making it or not. But that's a sales pitch. You sit down and you say, here's what I do. Here's who I do it for. Here's who I want you to refer to me. And a lot of times it's a one-way relationship. They know you're not going to be sending millionaire 65-year-olds. Maybe, you get lucky or they get lucky and you do. But ultimately, you're very much asking for something. Whereas the way you went about it was basically through volunteering and through hard work. You became, again, this face of next gen in front of all these planners. You've become the guy that young planners are looking to because they're like, oh, well, Eric's organizing everything. He's quote unquote in charge of everything next gen related, so he must be important. And so now they all know who you are. And in many ways, they may be the ones that are actually referring out the young planner or the young clients that come to their larger RIA because they can't work with them because they have high minimums. So they may be the ones making the referrals anyway. And people love to see folks give back and being involved in the board and being, your name goes out with every email that's being sent out about next gen. Just all of those pieces are huge benefits. And I would say much more effective than just sitting down with that one-on-one conversation and asking for the referral. Instead, you're giving them a reason to refer to you. And again, if you're very clear about who you work with, your name will come to mind for all of those planners. So I think that's a really good example of in-person networking and in-person marketing, I guess, that you're going to get local referrals from, but you can still work with them virtually. Just because you're getting a local referral for one of these clients doesn't necessarily mean you have to work with them in person.
Exactly. Right. You create the relationship that you want to have with the client. You set the expectations. And if they want to work with you still, then they will. If they don't, that's okay too. They don't have to. And maybe they wouldn't be a good client anyway if they don't like the virtual aspect of it.
Any other effective in-person things that you've done besides kind of P&I networking group type stuff and then, being involved with FPA Next Gen?
Yeah, there's a few things. One of them is similar to the FPA and NAPFA thing in that I've actually spoken now in front of advisors about engaging millennials. I did it at the FPA National Conference this year. And that wasn't just something that fell into my lap. I actually had to work for that and get votes to have the topic chosen for the national conference and then work my way into being the speaker for the topic that I suggested. So it was a long process, but I got in front of these advisors. And again, I'm not necessarily getting in front of the advisors because I work with advisors. I'm getting in front of the advisors to share that I'm the millennial expert, and in helping them understand how they may be able to create a process for millennials in their business, they're looking at me as the guy who knows how to do it. And oftentimes, advisors are not going to implement that process. They're going to just say, okay, we're doing this, we're good at this. Eric, you take this guy, as a referral. So that's helped out a bit. One other thing that is just joining an alumni association, right? Everybody says, go back to your college, see how you can network within your alumni association and see if you can build business that way. Again, I'm not going out and saying, hey, I'm coming to these events and give me business. I'm actually on the board of directors of the Alumni Association at Babson College. So that is a very passive way. I think all of these are passive. A very passive way of staying in front of people and showing that I actually walk the walk and give back and am committed to helping others. And in return, I get business because of it. So there's any number of things that you can find in your area that you are either connected with because of your past experience, or you are going out and establishing a connection because of your current interest. But there are plenty of ways to market face-to-face without actually going out there and pitching yourself.
And especially for those folks that are looking at starting a firm, I know what comes to mind, because this came to mind for me when I was looking at, I guess, balancing or prioritizing all the different marketing efforts. Because, if you listen to our last episode, you'll hear everything about marketing online, and you're listening to this and you hear about all the stuff you can be doing in person, and you realize you could spend 80 hours a week doing nothing but marketing. You have to prioritize. And I'm more of a fan, like you are, of what I call the shotgun approach. Try a lot of different things and kind of see what works, and then you can kind of hone in a little bit. But ultimately, I think it's important to try to balance some short play opportunities, some medium play, and some long play opportunities. Because I think what happens is we can either get so focused on traditional marketing and financial planning, which a lot of it is what we're talking about today, which are longer play marketing opportunities, in terms of getting referrals, from estate attorneys out of a BNI group. You're probably not going to get a referral tomorrow. That's a longer term relationship that you're building. Anything relationship based is going to be a little bit longer term. We can be very focused on that, and that's good for the long term, but it's hard to pay your bills if you're not getting clients today. But the flip side, and I think what's more dangerous, is that people focus on those shorter term marketing opportunities, the quick hits, they'll spend money on print advertising or something like that that's going to have a singular effect right now to be able to pay their bills, and they never get around to doing the longer term stuff. And I think it's really important to try to find a balance between what are some things you can do today that'll generate a few clients, what are some things that'll potentially build out that lead pipeline for the next 3 to 6 months, but then what are your 1 to 5 year growth opportunities. And I think what you'll find is that a lot of what we're talking about today are those 1 to 5 years. And if you're sitting there today, you're thinking 1 to 5 years is so far away. But when you're in year 2 or 3, like you are, Eric, you start to see you're reaping the benefits now. And thankfully you started doing that 2 or 3 years ago. Otherwise you wouldn't be reaping any of those benefits now.
Yeah, that's a good point too. And to be clear, I actually started doing this in 2008 when I first came into the financial advisor world. From the corporate world.
That's a great point.
And I've never been good at the short play, admittedly so. I'm getting better at it now because I'm more confident about what I do and how I do it for people. But I was always in it for the long play, in that I was trying to build relationships. I wanted to go in and just do what's right, help other people out. And in that sense, the longer play is that they will return the favor somewhere down the road. Who cares if they do or they don't? I'm still going to do the same things that I do. And I was actually basically reprimanded for it when I was working for other advisors, saying, what are you doing? You need to go out there and you need to sell, call people on the phone, do this, do that. And I'm like, in my head, I want to build relationships with people. So there's a fine line with that too, because you do need to make money now and you do want to continue to build relationships for the future. So the key is to find a consistent income stream now. So whether it is getting a side hustle, being a waiter, doing something else like that to have the income now so that you can build the relationships for the longer term and not have the pressure on having to sell right away, or doing something different, maybe working for another advisor and is always be marketing is really the bottom line, to make sure that you're always representing yourself in the best light and you're sharing with everybody what you do and why you're passionate about it and what you enjoy in your life, and building those relationships up, because eventually it's going to help you out. I was actually talking to a recent client, and she wants to start a business, an online business. And she said, you know what? I haven't actually gotten into the social media world yet. I'm holding off on that because I want to build out my plan, and then I want to get everything in detail and then implement everything all at once. And when I do that, I'll start with the social media. And really, that's not the right way to do it. And this applies to advisors, anybody starting a business, virtual specifically. You want to start building your connections and your networks now. You don't have to have a reason or a plan or a specific agenda. It's just about building the network, because you never know when you can tap into that network. So the earlier, the better.
You bring up a couple of awesome points. I totally agree on having that side income. We need to just do an episode specifically on the side hustle. We get so many questions about how to generate some of that income, because it does take away from some of the shorter play. Not take away, it takes away the need for some of those shorter play marketing opportunities, which honestly, most of us are pretty bad at, because they're things that we don't enjoy doing. And I think a lot of us got into financial planning because we enjoy the relationship. And so many of our marketing opportunities, even if it's blogging's a long play. So even if you don't want to meet with folks in person, you want to build out a blog and resources online, that takes some time. So having that income stream is huge. But yeah, it is all about who you know, and more importantly, who knows you and who knows what you do and who you do it for. And you can build out those, whether it's LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter or, kind of where you think your ideal client is going to be sitting. I think that's huge, because honestly, I made a name for myself in kind of our small corner of the industry and kind of the independent fee only space via Twitter. I mean, that's how I got involved. That's how I started my career, and ultimately ended up becoming advisor facing instead of client facing through a lot of stuff with social media. And so one, you never know where that's going to lead, but go ahead and start getting involved now. And again, you can start building these relationships today. You can start going to networking groups. You can start getting involved with FPA Next Gen or NAPFA Genesis. You can get involved in, XYPN's VIP group. I'll pitch that, you can go to our private Facebook group and interact with other advisors, start getting to know people, because you never know where those relationships will lead. Because I'll tell you that, pretty much everybody that I know that has ever volunteered with FPA or NAPFA, or they get involved with study groups, or they get involved in different things, they always say you get back way more than you ever put in. It's not why you get into it. And if that's, to our earlier points, if that's your motivation, probably not going to work out all that well for you. But it is so wildly beneficial just to get to know people, meet people, have them know what you do, because you just never know how that's going to help you get a client, get a job, I don't know, buy your next house, whatever it is. It's just constantly be building and nurturing those relationships.
Yes, absolutely. And even in this made me think of something slightly off preempting what I was saying before about building your networks out. Mm-hmm. I've heard people say that they don't want to go out and network because they don't have a pitch. So if someone asks them what they're doing, they don't necessarily know how to describe it. And I think that you can jump in and just build those relationships anyway. And how you do that is, you maybe, if they ask you what you're doing, you just tell them, you be honest with them. Like, I'm still creating that right now, or I'm thinking of this and I'm just figuring out how to structure it. And then you can go into being really curiously engaged with them and what they're about, and asking them direct questions about how they do things, what they're interested in, and finding out how you can help them. Because regardless of whether you know what you're doing or not yet, if you're helping other people directly like that, they're going to figure out a way to help you. So whether it's now or it's in the future, you'll have your system in place, you'll have your pitch down, and then you can share it at that point. But don't hold back from building those relationships because you don't have that in place yet.
I'm trying to remember where I first heard this concept. It may have been in a planning conference where I didn't come up with this, is what I'm saying. This is a quote from somebody else, or a paraphrase, I should say. But it was, always live in beta. Nothing is ever done. Nothing is ever perfect. It's like You can't wait until you think you have the perfect polished product or the perfect polished presentation or elevator speech or business card or anything else to really go out there and get started. We kind of always live in beta because nothing's ever done. We're always improving. We're always changing. We're always evolving. So be willing to just kind of put yourself out there and give some of this stuff a shot. And I hope what listeners take away from the episode today is just that, when we start talking virtual and start talking about working virtually, you don't have to stay. You don't have to abandon your local market. Probably the most powerful marketing technique or the most powerful way to build a business is working virtually, but marketing locally. And it's not to say you don't also end up marketing virtually just because that does end up happening naturally. But it is a really, really great way to build a business and build a local brand. But it doesn't mean that just because you're building a local business from your marketing standpoint that you can't also work virtually and live in Costa Rica for a month if that's your goal for your family, for yourself to be able to do. So you really do have a lot of options. And it's the beauty of financial planning is we really can build businesses that support our great life, whatever that great life is. And so if you want to come to Bozeman with me and ski 80 days a year, great. If you want to go live on a beach somewhere, great. You want to spend 6 months in Thailand, cool. If you just want to be a homebody and hang out with your family more often, that's cool too. You really can build whatever calls you and whatever it is that fulfills you. So, Eric, thanks so much for being on the show today. I think that this is just insanely valuable of a conversation to have because, again, I think we can be a little too extreme sometimes in the way we come off. So thanks for bringing some balance back to the show.
You're welcome. This is always exciting. I mean, it's stuff that I think about all day long, so I can finally just get it out. So if I can help other people do it, then I'm more than happy to do it whenever you need help.
I love it. Well, thanks so much, man. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
That was a really fun show to do. I was serious at the end when I thanked Eric for bringing some balance back to the show because I know I can be a little extreme when it comes to running a virtual practice because it's something I'm really passionate about. But ultimately, I really do believe that you can build a very effective business and grow your business very effectively by having a virtual presence, but marketing locally. It really comes down to just finding what you want to build and what works for you. Now, remember that you can find the show notes along with all the resources mentioned in this episode, as well as a link to download our ebook, The Virtual Advisor, at xyplanningnetwork.com/28. This month's shows are brought to you by Financial Planners Assistance, providing compliance services to financial planners and other investment advisors since 1982. Financial Planners Assistance is a boutique consulting firm that provides personalized compliance services firms are looking for. I've personally worked with Financial Planners Assistance since launching my firm back in 2012, and I can't say enough about the awesome service and support I've received, including going through an audit by the state of Wisconsin. Check them out at financialplannersassistance.com, and you can also check out the interview that we had with their president and senior compliance consultant, Jim Cullen. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.